Hey everybody, welcome to Off the Shelf Board Game Reviews. This right here now begins my top 51 board games, or I should say top 51 tabletop games of all time. This specific video is going to cover numbers 51 all the way to 41. Next video is going to be 40 to 31. Next one after that's going to be 30 to 21 and on until we get to number 1. And again, at the end, after I do all these videos, I'm going to have a little bit of reverie, talk about my list, and talk about some of the things that changes, some of how my taste changes, and just go over a couple kind of cool stats about the things because I'm kind of a stats guy. I like stats, and it's kind of fun to go over them and kind of see how things have changed. Anyways, I don't want to do a lot of the wah stuff. Let's just go hit the fun and start everything off with number 51 right down on the table. Number 51 on the list is Shadows of Brimstone, which is pretty much at this point is almost a lifestyle game because this game has taken on a life of its own. There are multiple expansions, multiple base sets for the game, multiple different worlds, multiple different ways to play this game, but I'm getting ahead of myself because how do you play this game? Shadows of Brimstone, if you are a computer gamer, the best way to describe Shadows of Brimstone is it's kind of like Diablo, or maybe even Borderlands. I like to describe it as basically like a loot haul style kind of game. You're basically going to have your hero, you're going to start off at level 1, and you're going to have tons and tons of fun, basically trying to grab as much loot as you can. Now I know some people are going to say that's not what the game is, but stick with me for just 1 second. You're really trying to get the best loot, the best gear, level up your hero to become more powerful, to take on bigger baddies, even bigger baddies, and finally take on the biggest baddies in the game. And if you ever played Diablo on the PC or Borderlands, you understand it's actually a lot like that. It's not really like an RPG game in a box, and I know a lot of people enjoy it like an RPG in a box, but that's not really how the game is played best, at least not in my opinion. This game truly is a game where you are taking your level 1 hero and you're going to hunt for the best gear, the best level ups, the best improvements, and you're going to take your lowly hero from the level 1 all the way up to level 8 where they're going to be much more powerful, a lot more abilities, a lot of special gear taken from all these different worlds. Maybe you're going to get gear from the City of the Ancients, you're going to get gear from the Swamp of Hope, maybe you'll travel over into the Orients, maybe you'll go into Space Age realms, maybe you'll head over to Turdera. You'll go to all these worlds grabbing all this gear, having these wonderful grand adventures as your hero grows from this little level 1 hero all the way up to this super powerful level 8 hero. Now in my mind, I never play this game like an RPG because if I want to play an RPG, obviously I'm going to play an RPG. I have the most fun playing this game kind of like a loot haul game. I enjoy taking a level 1 hero, just saying, hey, you know what, I'm going to play the Bandito, or I'm going to play the Lawman, or I'm going to play the Gunslinger, and I'm going to level up all the way from level 1, and I'm just going to hunt for the best gear I can find, and I'm going to have tons of fun stories to play with my friends. Now the cool thing about this game is it plays solo very, very well. You probably want to use 2 heroes to make it a little bit easier on yourself, but if you are a masochist, you can play with 1 hero. Again, I really don't recommend it, but hey, you can if you really want to. Or you can play this game up to 6 friends, or sorry, up to 6 players with 5 of your best friends if you really want to. Now I personally don't recommend you play the game with 6 players, and while it does require you to have 2 base sets, whether it's the Forbidden Fortress, the City of the Ancients, Swamp of Hope, whatever 2 sets you want to have, it does require you to have 2 sets to play up to 6 players, but I actually don't recommend you play the game that way because unfortunately one of the negatives of the game is the AI is basically not that smart. The way the AI works is it's the more heroes it is, the more bad guys you have on the board, and it kind of starts to feel like a slog when you get to 5 or 6 players. As a matter of fact, the best way I recommend you play this game when you get 5 or 6 players is pretend you're living out that great saloon scene in the Old West where one gang walks up to another gang and decides to lay down a bet to see who can do a mission better. Split off into 2 groups of 3 people each, and then use a community deck in the center of the board, or in the center of the table, where all the cards in the center, you all draw from the same deck of cards, and you're basically racing to see who can accomplish the goal first. Of course, you have to work it a little bit. If somebody gets a card that doesn't work because somebody has the other tile in play, just ignore it and draw another card, but it's actually a heck of a lot of fun to have a race doing that. And it actually makes the game play a lot of fun that way because I think this game plays best as a 3 or 4 hero game because the game seems to bounce around that. I've had the most fun. It feels the least like a slog because like I said, when you get 6 heroes on the board, you're going to get so many monsters on the board it almost becomes a slog because you're going to move up dozens of monsters. You're going to lay waste to half of them. Dozens more monsters will come out, and it kind of feels like a slog. So that's the best way to describe to play the game when you get to the higher player counts. But if you're looking for a fantastic loot style game where you're trying to level up your hero and become much more powerful, much akin to classic PC games like Diablo and Borderlands, you can't go wrong with this game and having a heck of a lot of fun. Number 50 on the list, just like number 51, is brand new to the list, and that's going to be Evil High Priest from Peterson Games. Now, I know I said earlier that I'm slowly discovering that I'm a huge fan of worker placement games, and this game is a really extremely enjoyable worker placement game. Now, we've all played worker placement games before, and if you're not familiar with the term of worker placement game, you're basically going to have a certain amount of workers. You're going to send them out to various locations. They're going to gain you resources, use those resources to do other things. Those resources compound other resources to give you victory points. What Evil High Priest does that's more unique to the worker placement genre is it does a couple things that are not as common in the worker placement genre. The first thing that's a little bit more unique about this game is that the resources you're going out to get with your workers are your victory points. And you're going to spend these resources that, again, are your victory points to gain more resources. So the game is a little bit tighter on the aspect because you are having to weigh every single purchase you make or every worker placement that you're going to spend out there because you're spending resources to gain more resources. So in a nice way of saying this, you're basically spending victory points to get more victory points. So if you're not efficient with your spending of your victory points, you're actually not going to do really, really well in the game. And it's kind of a nice, interesting twist on the worker placement genre that I really, really enjoy. Now, I also am not afraid to admit I do enjoy the Cthulhu mythos. It's a little bit of a horror, adds a little bit of fun, and the game does fit the theme of that very, very well. But what it also does that adds on to a lot of the fun of the game is they have taken the theme of the Cthulhu mythos and added in a board that is going to be part of every single game you play. The cool thing about it is that every single board that you play is going to be represented by one of the great old ones. Yeah, I'm not going to go over all these great old ones because we all know the Cthulhu mythos, but every single one of these boards is going to add a different wrinkle to the game to make it play just a little bit differently. You have the super basic Cthulhu board, which follows the basic rules of the game. Then you have the Black Goat board, which is going to change up the way the game plays. And every one of these expansions adds more boards. There's multiple of these boards, and they definitely play a lot differently. It's not a gimmick. And at first I was like, before I even played the game, I'm like, it'll probably be a little bit of a gimmick. The boards will be a little different. It's not a little different. Each one of these boards is a lot different. They change up the strategies, they change the way you're going to be playing the game, and they add an extreme amount of variety to the game. I've played this game multiple times, and I am nowhere near seeing all these boards. I mean, I will freely admit that I will probably never play the Cthulhu board ever again because it's the simplest board. It adds the least amount of variety. But some of these boards and some of these expansions add a lot of variety and a lot of strategy, and I have a heck of a lot of fun with every single one of these boards. Add in that the unique mechanics of the game makes it so that not only are you going out there to get your resources that are your victory points, once you get them, you have to protect them, which is something that I really find cool and I really, really enjoy. Because in a lot of worker placement games, it's kind of a race, and that's kind of the theme of the mechanic of the game, but it's a race to get the resources as quick as possible, and then once you have the resources, you don't worry about it anymore. Not in Evil High Priest. You're going to race to go out those resources, but then you have to protect them, because if you don't protect them, you're going to lose them. And every one of these worker placement games, they're all an economy of actions. If your actions that you're performing are not gaining you more victory points, you basically wasted your entire turn, and any wasted turn in a worker placement game is one step closer to losing. So you factor in all these things, the awesome amount of variety in replay with all these different boards that are going to change every time you play the game, depending on which board you want to play, the fact that you have to protect your resources, the fact that your resources are your victory points, and I didn't even include the things such as every person gets their own priest when they start the game, all with different basic powers, kind of makes it a little bit more asymmetric. The fact that you have these different kind of monsters, you can play with the basic monsters every time you play the game. You can play with the advanced monsters, the fact that some of these boards are going to come out later in the game, the fact that you're going to have a different amount of workers that you can go out there and gain, and just the fact that the theme of the game just makes this game really, really awesome and definitely cements it as my number 50 game of all time when it comes to tabletop games. Coming in at number 49 is Lord of the Rings from Reiner Knizia. Now, this game was actually number 47 on my prior list, so it actually didn't move that much. It moved down a little bit, but I'm pretty sure this game is not going to fall off my list ever, simply because this is probably one of the most thematic, probably the best cooperative games you can ever own or ever play. And which is kind of fun when we're talking about Dr. Reiner Knizia, who is not really known to be the most thematic game designer. But yet, for some reason, his game design fits Lord of the Rings and the theme of Lord of the Rings perfectly, making this, hands down, the best Lord of the Rings board game you will ever play. And a little bit of a segue, it's a little bit disappointing that you can't really find the game anymore because there's an expansion for it, the Friends and Foes, which I'm still looking for, which just makes this game absolutely perfect. I would love to find it one day, and maybe one day it'll come back in print. Hopefully it will, and then I'll be able to get it just to finish my Lord of the Rings collection, make it just absolutely perfect. But what is Lord of the Rings? Lord of the Rings is a cooperative game where each of the players are working collectively to get the one ring and take it to Mount Doom and throw it inside Mount Doom into the lava and defeat Sauron. The way the game works, though, is that the players are working collectively, spending all of these cards to travel across the multiple locations that we remember from the story from Lord of the Rings. There's the Mines of Moria, there's Shelob's Lair, all these various locations that we've all remember from the books. The interesting thing about the game is this game forces cooperation, and the game forces sacrifice. I mean, it literally forces sacrifice, because the Eye of Sauron is constantly marching forward towards the players. If the Eye of Sauron ever reaches the Hobbit who has the ring, the players lose collectively. So the players are constantly, and I mean literally constantly, forced to make constant decisions and sacrifices of their own hobbits in an effort to protect the ring, which is the only goal. If the ring makes it to Mount Doom and you manage to throw it inside without falling to the corruption, the land has been saved and Sauron has been defeated. And the game fits that theme almost to a perfect T. Every time I play this game, I feel the theme of the Lord of the Rings. I feel that every single time we're making our decisions, we are literally, as a group, trying to figure out, okay, what kind of sacrifices are we going to make in an effort just to make it? And the game just hangs perfectly on a razor's edge of balance. You'll have multiple boards, and if I didn't explain it well enough, you're basically traveling through every one of these boards, following the story, and every time you complete a board, you're going to move on to the next board. But every single board is going to cause you to give up a couple more resources. You'll go to another board, you get a couple more resources, and then you'll lose a couple more resources. But it's such a razor's edge of making those sacrifices when you need to, and forging on forward, find out when you're going to take the corruption of using that ring just to get past that one little last obstacle. And by making that final sacrifice, going past that obstacle, you had to also give up more of your resources. So again, the game just creates this awesome blend of sacrifice, theme of Lord of the Rings, making this a fantastic cooperative game that plays all the way up to 5 players, making this a very solid number 49 on my top tabletop games of all time. Locking in a very solid number 48 and remaining at 48 from the last list is Fury of Dracula. Now, Fury of Dracula is a hidden movement style game where one person is going to control Dracula while the other players, plays up to 5 players, are going to control the heroes from the story who are trying to defeat the evil count and stop him from spreading his evil influence all across Europe. Basically, the players have about 3 weeks to do so. Now, it can take a little bit longer, but generally speaking, if we make it through the 3rd week as Dracula, you pretty much have a good chance you're going to win the game unless the players can make a Hail Mary play. So the players are kind of in a rush to hunt down the evil count and put a stake right through his heart and end his evil ways. Now, the very cool thing about this game is it's a hidden movement game. So the heroes never have any idea where Dracula is because he's going to move by placing cards along a track. Every one of these cards will be placed face down, and it's going to symbolize where Dracula is currently hiding. And the players are going to use their own cards, their own special abilities, their own events, and their own items that they're going to find as they travel all throughout Europe in an effort to find exactly where the Count is hiding. Once they do encounter the Count, there's going to be a combat where the Count gets to use his special power cards versus items, equipment, and gear that the heroes are trying to use. And again, if they get that final point of damage, put that stake right through his heart, he is going to be defeated. But all he has to do is just hold out for the time it takes to make it all the way to the end, put enough corruption on the board, corrupt the entire country, and then our heroes are going to lose the game. Now, Fury of Dracula does a lot of really cool things that are very fun, and in my mind make this the best hidden movement enemy one player versus a group of players style game. I really enjoy this game for multiple reasons. Now, it does the hidden movement extremely fantastically. It fits the theme of the game very well. I also didn't mention this yet, but there's also little cards you may laying out as you're laying out basically traps for the heroes. So as they start getting a hint of where you're going to be hiding, they're going to start traveling all these locations, and you're going to start revealing these traps, whether they happen to be mobs, or it could be rats, or it could be even other vampires. Let's see if I get lucky. Nope. Bodyguards, but there's vampires in here. Trust me, they're in there. And these are all amazing, awesome traps that you can leave for the heroes who are desperately hunting you down, and it becomes a game of cat and mouse. Because the interesting thing about this game, which is a little bit more unique to the Hidden Trader, Hidden Movement game, is in a lot of the hidden trader, hidden movement style games, you're trying to stay away from the heroes so they never discover you. In Fear Your Dracula, it's a cat and mouse game, and you get to decide when you're playing the mouse or when you're playing the cat, and you're going to go after the heroes and try to defeat them. Because if you can get your mark of Dracula on them, you get extra advantages, you bring more corruption, and you bring yourself one step closer to winning the game. That's Fear Your Dracula, number 48 of my top tabletop games of all time. Number 47 on the list, and new to the list, is Adrenaline, but just because it's new to the list, don't think it's a flash in the pan style game. Interesting enough, when I made my last list, I had never played Adrenaline at all, and I am positive that I had, it would have actually been on my original list, because this is a game from Czech Games Edition, which is basically, best way to describe it is, again, trying to use the PC reference. If you ever play classic PC style games like Doom, or actually probably a better reference would be Unreal, which is not as well known as Doom. Everybody knows the Doom first person shooter where everybody takes their little soldier and you go through various maps and you're basically trying to gun each other down. A more modern reference would be Halo or something like that. But I think a better reference would actually be Unreal, or maybe Unreal Tournament, because basically what this game is every person takes one of their little soldiers or one of their heroes. I don't want to use the term hero because you're definitely not heroes, but you're fighting through a labyrinth and you're trying to defeat the other players, which could make it seem like it's probably going to be a game that's going to fall apart. But this game has the magic of CGE in it because it is made and designed so fantastically well. Now, the game doesn't use dice for combat. It uses cards. There's already one bonus in the game's favor. You're not relying on the randomness of dice. You're using cards to do damage to other players. And how do you do damage to other players? We're going to gain resources or ammunition or stuff like that you're going to use to power these cards. So you're going to spend your turns getting the resources to power the cards, attack the other players, you go get the resources to get the cards in a circle. Well, that would probably be boring pretty darn quick. So again, CGE uses the magic to add a couple more layers of fun into the game. First of all, the game incentivizes you to not pick on the same person all the time. So it forces you to spread out and go against other players. And yes, the game does play with multiple players. There's multiple different miniatures for all the heroes. They all have their own special powers and everything like that. I could pull them all out, but trying to make this a little bit quick. But the game incentivizes you to go after other players because the amount of victory points you can get on the game is not based on killing the other players. It just is based on having the most damage on them when that player dies. And the cool thing is when you die, you're not dead. Just like any first-person shooter, you're simply going to respawn, grab some more ammo, and go after the other players all over again. This game is extremely brilliant, it is extremely fun, and it does the first-person shooter in a board game in a way that I never thought would work until I play this game. This game actually is making me really look forward a lot to the next game from CGE, which is going to be coming out, I believe, in Essen. And it's supposed to basically be almost like Diablo or something like that. And I am really looking forward to that game because I see the magic they can do with what is, I thought, would never make a board game. They turned a first-person shooter into an awesome board game. I bet they're going to do the same thing with the game of Diablo, and I'm really, really looking forward to it. Anyways, Adrenaline, a fantastic game. First-person shooter in a board. Who knew it would work, and who knew it would work this well? That's Adrenaline. Dropping 3 points from 43 down to 46 is Android the board game. Now, best way to describe Android the board game is, this is basically Blade Runner the board game. They basically took everything that is Blade Runner that they could get away with without violating any copyrights or anything along those lines and turned it into a game. Because this is a dystopian future, this is LA, when there's androids and riots, corruption, where the corporations rule the cities, money makes right, and the people suffer and try to survive just one more day. Well, if you've seen Blade Runner, you know what's going on in the game of Android. In the game of Android, every single one of the players picks a detective, a police officer, maybe a private eye, or maybe you just happen to be a psychic or an android. I forgot to pull the android out, but there's also an android. But basically, you're going to pick one of 5 players. And this game plays best as a 4-player game. As a 5-player game, it's still fantastic, but it can go a little bit long. And as a 3-player game, you're not going to get as much of the interaction. I'll explain the interaction in just a second. But every person is going to pick one of their heroes, and you're trying to basically solve a murder mystery. Now, the game comes with multiple murder mysteries, and they're all going to play out differently. But every one of these murder mysteries has a certain amount of suspects. And much like the corrupted future, nobody really cares who the suspect really is. you basically have 2 weeks to pin the crime on somebody because, well, the government can only afford to pay you so much. And for the happiness of the public, they need the crime pinned on somebody so we can move on to the next crime. So the interesting thing is you are playing this game as your detective, trying to find the clues throughout the board and pin the crime on the person you think is guilty. Now, secretly at the start of the game, every player picks the person they think is the most guilty and the person they think is the most innocent, and they're going to spend the game trying to get the evidence to prove their theory. Whoever proves their theory the best is going to win the game. So the players are secretly moving around, not giving away their ideas too much, and secretly putting evidence all over the place on the suspects. Some evidence such as physical evidence or witness evidence, physical evidence or video footage, and you're going to use various amounts of evidence to try to prove your case while the other players are working hard on proving their case, which can make some really interesting dynamics. For example, if I'm trying to prove that Noise is the most guilty while another player is trying to prove that he's the least guilty, obviously I'm playing against another player, but neither one of us really knows that. But the interesting dynamic comes in from the game because the way you play cards for yourself is by playing negative cards on other players. So on your turn, you're going to have a hand of cards represent the other players on the board, and you're going to play them on those players, trying to make their life more difficult, because along with trying to solve this mystery, we all have our own personal demons that we're trying to work out and try to overcome, which add complications to the story. For example, the android is just trying to prove that he's just as human as everybody else while he has his own fallacies. And then you have the alcoholic who is trying to, whoops, that's not the alcoholic. No, it is the alcoholic. Ha! Then you have the private eye who also has his own personal problems with his ex. And then you have the PI, and all these players are trying to get through their own storylines while players are playing cards on them, playing cards on themselves, trying to prove the final story, creating this fantastic story-based game that makes us number 46 in my top 51 games of all time. Number 45 and new to the list is Dice Forge, a 2 to 4 player game of forging dice. In Dice Forge, every one of the players is going to have 2 dice. They're going to have a board to control their resources, and then they're going to have a board where they're moving out their pawn to go to various different locations where they're going to spend all their resources to get cards, which are going to give them new abilities and new faces for their dice. Because the entertaining part of this game is you're trying to improve your dice. That's going to allow you to roll to get better resources, more victory points, more abilities to get more cards that are going to create interesting combos in a game that plays a set amount of rounds, and whoever has the most victory points is going to be the grand winner of the game. Now, Dice Forge struck me as an interesting game, and it got its hooks into me for a couple different reasons. One, if you've ever played games with me, you know that dice hate me. If there's ever a time where I need to roll perfectly, I'm not going to do it. So when it comes to dice games, most dice games I kind of shy away from because I know my luck is not going to hold out on them. Even great games like King of Tokyo, which I have a lot of fun with, but I treat it more as like a beer and pretzel style game because I know the dice are very rarely going to fall in my favor. What Dice Forge has done is it allows somebody like me who has terrible luck with dice to still play a dice game and have a lot of fun that offers enough strategy to counteract my terrible luck with dice. And it's done it in a game that is tons and tons of fun and entertainment with a lot of replay, and the replay comes in the fact that there are lots of cards to choose from every time you build your board. There's different ways you're going to forge your dice every time you play the game because these are the dice faces you can add your dice to modify your dice to change your strategy and change how you want to play the game based on the cards that are available, based on the dice or the dice faces that are still available that haven't been purchased by the other players, and also add in the fact that there's now expansions for the game that adds even more variety to it. Dice Forge is an extremely entertaining game. It's a dice game that allows somebody like me with terrible luck to have lots of fun playing it and still feel like I have enough agency to stand a chance to win because I'm not being hosed by the dice. That is Dice Forge. Number 44 and new to the list is 51st State, well, let's just call this a deck building game and a tableau building game with a little bit of a bite. Now for me, if you know anything about my taste, I really don't enjoy games that are described as multiplayer solitaire. So anytime you take a game that allows you to interact with the other players, it's always going to pique my interest. And anytime you take a mechanic that's known to be more of a solitaire style gameplay and add the ability to interact with other players, you're going to definitely have my interest, and that's what 51st State has done. In 51st State, this is your very, very basic tableau building game where you're going to be having cards from a center pile. You're going to be gaining these cards, you're going to be spending your resources to put these cards into play, and the way they're going to be placed into play is going to give you different abilities to store resources, the ability to spend resources, and the ability to gain extra victory points based on locations. And yes, I know I'm putting these out wrong, but I'm in a hurry and I'm timed on this. So your objective is to put these locations out to increase your empire. Here's the thing that makes this game so awesome. Well, let's ignore the fact that the game is very well balanced. The game adds a lot of interesting decisions and the ability to pull out different cards, different expansions, and different gameplay. But the thing that makes this game so awesome in my mind is the simple fact that you can interact with the other players. Because this game is basically taking the theme of Mad Max. It's a future where let's just say that the nuclear bomb has gone off and the world is basically in ruins, and you're looking at a Mad Max world where basically everybody is trying to survive in the nuclear fallout, where gangs rove and various different people have their societies that they're trying to survive in. So you're trying to build your little home city. But the interesting thing is you can send out your units, your spies, your armies, your gangs, whatever you want to call them, represented by these tokens, to attack other players and destroy their buildings that are giving them resources. That alone is one of the things that makes this game so amazingly fantastic for me. But that is also paired with the fact that you have a game that adds a lot of replay, a lot of variety. There's expansions built into the game right from the get-go, and you're going to mix in these expansions depending on how you want to play. And the fact that this game has a good variety of play, whether you're playing at 2 players all the way up to 5 players. And yes, there are solo rules for the game if that is something that's interesting to you. And actually, solo rules are actually pretty darn decent. I wouldn't make this my only solo game. That's what Mage Knight is for. But if you're looking for a game that you can play solo, play with up to 5 friends, and it's a deck building, tableau building game with a little bit of bite, 51st State is an awesome game that fits every one of those criteria. Number 43 and new to the list is Codenames. And when I'm looking at Codenames, I'm talking about the entire series of games, whether it's a team-based Codenames, the spouse and couple version, Codenames Duet, or Codenames After Dark when you want to play with a whole bunch of partygoers with alcohol and just having tons and tons of fun. But if you're not familiar with Codenames, the idea of Codenames is whether you're playing with teams or partners or however you're playing it, you're trying to make your team or your partner pick all the words that match your color before somebody picks one of the black words or before you're out of guesses. And if you pick one of the black words, you obviously lose. If you pick all the colors in your color or all the words in your color, your team or your partner and you are going to win the game. And the way the game is going to work is you're simply going to give a one-word clue that's going to match as many of the cards on the table as possible, basically without busting. And the game is an extremely brilliant design. It is so simple, but it's a game that you can get gamers to play. It's a game you can get non-gamers to play. It's a game you can play with your spouse, whether you just happen to be going out for dinner and you want to have a game to play while you're waiting for your meal to arrive. Because it's such a small game, you can pack it up and fit in just a small little bag to bring with you. Because there's no dice. All you need is enough room to put out 25 cards and somebody to start having tons of fun with. It plays with all age groups, non-gamers, like I've already said. It plays with grouping up the non-gamers with the gamers. It plays with everybody. It's just a fantastic design on that level. And I'm not going to lie, this game has an extra special place for me simply because my wife is not a gamer at all. This is one game that I can get my wife to play. My wife is the kind of person who only plays party games. We'll play things such as Pictionary. We'll play games such as, not categories, but we'll play the game where you're drawing out pictures and you're passing it down. Telestrations, that's the game I was looking for. We also like to play that one party game that's like Apples for Naughty People that I'm not going to mention because I like my channel to remain PG. Anyways, we will play Codenames Duet, and that is something I enjoy a lot. This is a great game. It is a great design. It plays with everybody, all ages, all groups. You can combine all your groups. It is just a fantastic game that meets every single criteria and definitely makes it a game that belongs on any favorite game list by any single person. Number 42 and new to the list is Glorantha, The God's War by Sandy Peterson and Peterson Games. This is an area control game for 2 to 8 players where every single player is going to control an asymmetric faction, whether it happens to be Storm, whether it happens to be Sky, whether it happens to be Darkness. Chaos, or the other 4 factions that come with the expansion, the players are vying for control of Glorantha, and whoever scores the most victory points is going to win the game. Now, this game manages to get to this list by doing a couple different things. First of all, it's not about bashy, whoever gets the most victory points wins the game, because it's not about fighting. This game actually has a lot of diplomacy, and actually the most diplomatic faction is probably the one who's going to win, not the one who manages to bash on the others, because as you're playing this game, you're going to be adding buildings to the board. These buildings allow you to get your power to do more things. They're also going to help you score your victory points. And not only that, as the victory point track is going up, the board state is going to change. Things are actually going to change on the board, adding differences, and not shown here, but there's a couple of extra sideboards that actually come with the game that add to the map. You have the hells and you have the skies, and the way those are going to interact with the main board are going to change as the game goes on. So not only is the state of the world you're playing on changing, but the state of the land is changing, and as you get to certain levels, you're going to start enacting the Great Compromise. Now, the Great Compromise is another thing that adds to the diplomacy of the game. And I'm not going to bore you with all the rules of the game. I'm just going to tell you that all these things put together create an extremely fantastic asymmetric game that, well, I'm going to be a little bit of a spoiler here. It actually dethroned Cthulhu Wars, and Cthulhu Wars is no longer on my list of top 51 games of all time. Doesn't mean I don't like Cthulhu Wars anymore. It just means that this game is even better. It has taken a game that is basically an area control game in Cthulhu Wars, throwing dice, trying to control the most area, and it's taken that basic concept and added one more extra thing by adding extra diplomacy to the game. Not only do you now have the table talk like you did in Cthulhu Wars, but now you have diplomatic moments where you all need to make decisions, and those decisions are going to affect the entire table. Glorantha the Gods War is a very strong number 42 on my list. I don't see this one going anywhere, and I don't think it's going to go anywhere when Hyperspace comes out next year, unlike Cthulhu Wars, which was unseated by the Gods War. This game is definitely going to stay here for a long time. Number 42, that's the Gods War. Rounding out the list at number 41, and also new to the list, is Evolution, specifically Evolution Climate, which is the third in the series of the games. There was Evolution, there was Evolution Flight, which was an expansion to the base game, and then there came Evolution Climate. And Evolution Climate itself is the one that cemented this game onto my top 51 games of all time. Now, what is Evolution Climate? Well, it's basically a card game mixed in with a little bit of a resource game where each single player is basically just trying to feed their species to gain the most victory points at the end of the game. The interesting thing about this game is the way that each player is going to evolve their species, because you're going to be playing cards on your species, which is going to give them extra special abilities, whether it allows them to have cooperation, warning calls, hibernate, well, maybe we got to hibernate twice, or maybe long necks. All these special abilities are going to allow their little species to become more powerful, to evolve better in an effort just to become able to eat better and to survive throughout the time and to get the most victory points at the end of the game. Players basically score victory points by eating, by having the most evolved species at the end of the game, and also by not falling prey to the climate, which is slowly trying to destroy your species. Now, Evolution Climate is a very simple game to teach. It's a very simple game to play. It's a game that plays all the way up to 6 players, but it's a very deep strategy game, and there is a lot to this game. You have the variety with the way each one of the species comes out. You have the variety where the game is going to play differently every single time it plays, simply because the climate's going to change every time you play the game. Your species you're going to build is going to change every time you play the game. And there's different strategies to the game. There's certain strategies where you may want to have a whole bunch of species to eat as much food as possible. There's strategies where you can make carnivores, where you can attack other players' species. So you're constantly trying to protect your species by giving them defense in case another player is secretly building up a carnivore, or if you're just trying to build up an herbivore, or if you're trying to build up a lot of species. One species who is really powerful, lots of species which don't have a lot of abilities, big species, small species, high population species, all in an effort to avoid the Godzilla cat species, which is the grandest species of all. Now, Evolution Climate is a fantastic card game. It's been out for a while, and again, I think Climate is the best game of the entire series because it adds the climate part of the game, because in the basic Evolution game, you're basically building your species. In Climate, all the players are working to control the climate to add one more wrinkle to a game that solidifies it as my number 1 game on my top 51 games of all time. I hope you enjoyed this video covering my 51 to number 41 in my top 51 tabletop games of all time. If you have any comments or questions, make sure you leave them down in the YouTube comments below. I'll be sure to answer them as quickly as I can. You can also feel free to email me at offtheshelfboardgamereviews. That's otsbgr@gmail.com. I'll do my best to answer your questions as quickly as I can via email. If you enjoy this video and you enjoy this video series, click that like button, click that subscribe button. Also hit that subscribe button or that little bell down below to get further notifications when the rest of the videos in the series comes out. As always, thanks for watching.